Sultan Institute, and on behalf of the Center for Arts and Humanities, and on behalf of the History Department, I would like to welcome you to this lecture. Our guest lecturer, whom I have just introduced in West Hall, is Professor Tufan Buzpinar of Shahir University. He is known to some of you. Professor Buzpinar, originally we invited him in the context of the Hijaz Railway exhibition, and he kindly volunteered to give on the topic of his current research, which is Christian Zionism, or Laurence Oliphant, and the question of Jewish settlement in Palestine. The Oliphants Institute people were interested in hosting this lecture. That's why he is giving 2 lectures. It's hard labor for him today, in fact. He has just finished a lecture and he's starting another lecture. So please welcome Professor Buzpinar in the Oliphants Institute. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I will share findings of my latest research on this specific question. This lecture will be a bit specific on Laurence Oliphant's efforts in these 3 years to get permission from the Ottoman government. The idea of Jewish restoration to Palestine.
Please raise your voice.
Oh, sorry.
It seems the sound system is not operating. So
the idea of Jewish restoration to Palestine, as you know, goes back to the 16th century. In England, it emerged, and in the 19th century, from the 1830s onwards, some leading British philanthropists and politicians were interested in. For instance, in the 1830s, the first group of British religious people came to Palestine, and this Alexander Cade was one of them. And on his return, he published this book. This is available on internet. You can download and have a look. And published in 1844. And he made this slogan, a land without a people for a people without a land. That means Palestine. And another important person in the 1830s and 40s, 50s, until he died in 1885, was Lord Shaftesbury. He was the founder of Palestine Exploration Fund, and one of the leading British philanthropists of the period, who devoted all his life to this question, restoration of the Jews to Palestine, right? And it was because of Lord Shaftesbury's efforts that in 1840, the British government asked the Ottoman government to allow Jews settle in Palestine, arguing that they would help the Ottomans against Mehmed Ali of Egypt. Lord Palmerston was a key figure. You see his office, and he was the prime minister between 1859 and 65. He helped Lord Shaftesbury a lot. And Laurence Oliphant devoted his book, The Land of Gilead, which is on his visit to the region and in the way of preparation of his proposal to the Ottoman government, and devoted to Princess Christian. She was a friend of him, and also helped him to explain his project to the British government, the Prime Minister in 1879, and Foreign Minister. how much time I was allowed to?
30 more minutes.
Okay, 30 more minutes. Okay. Right, when he approached the Prime Minister in 1879 and the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Salisbury, they declined to take an official view, but they told him that he could go and prepare his project and to facilitate his journey to Palestine. Salisbury supplied him with letters of introduction addressed to the British diplomats in this area. So he came to Palestine, to Belka, and cooperated with the British diplomats and Mithat Pasha, the governor of Syria at the time, and finished his tour in the region and traveled to Istanbul in May 1879. We do not know the exact date of his proposal to the Ottoman government, but I think it was June 1879 that he submitted his proposal. Between 1879 June and April 1880, he did not receive any response from the Ottoman government, either because they did not take it seriously or because of the serious crisis that the Ottoman government was dealing with at the time. But Layard, the British ambassador in Istanbul, asked the Sultan to accept Oliphant and listen to him. So Layard, Oliphant, and Layard's wife, they were at the palace, probably in April 1880. But the Sultan was aware of Oliphant's efforts to organize Jewish settlement in Palestine. This is the only official meeting between a person who is trying to get official permission for Jewish settlement in Palestine at this time. The second will be in 1901, May 1901, by Herzl. The Sultan accepted him, but during Herzl's meeting with the Sultan in May 1901, they did not discuss the issue of Jewish settlement in Palestine. They discussed other issues, but both sides knew what was on the agenda, but officially they did not discuss. This is important because for the first time and the last time, the Ottoman Sultan accepted a British gentleman who tried to get official permission for the Jewish settlement in Palestine, right? That's why I think it's very important. And this is the only case that we have official documents and translations of proposals in Ottoman archives. So after the meeting, Layard reported to Granville, the Foreign Affairs Minister, that at his Oliphant's urgent requests, he presented him to the Sultan, who received him with his usual kindness and courtesy and invited him to dinner. At the meeting, Oliphant personally explained his project to the Sultan, who frankly shared his views of the project. In Layard's words at the meeting, His Majesty observed that his ministers, who had examined into it, had reported to him that it was not one to which he could give his assent, as it would create a state within a state. This is Layard's words. Mr. Oliphant I quote, replied that His Majesty's ministers had informed him that they were unanimous in their approval of it and that the opposition to it, to the project, came from His Majesty alone. The Sultan expressed his surprise, denied the statement, and requested that a full report of the communications which had passed between Mr. Oliphant and the port should be submitted to him. Oliphant then complained in somewhat angry terms of the manners in which he had been treated, because he was in Istanbul for almost a year, and this was in April 1880, and the first high-level official treatment of him. That's why he was complaining. Understandably, he was very angry and disappointed, and Lady Layard had more to say about the meeting. In her words, I quote, Oliphant plunged boldly into the grievance of having to leave Turkey after a year's stay without having obtained his concession for bringing the Jews to settle in Palestine. The Sultan said he had wished it, but all his ministers had been against it, at which Mr. Oliphant indignantly told His Majesty that the ministers told him His Majesty alone opposed it. As he was leaving the palace, Oliphant was very angry and broke out in abuse of everyone and vowed vengeance with his pen. Now, to use my time effectively, I have to skip some of the details. And then the Sultan sent the proposal to the ministers. And on 8th of May, 1880, the Sultan sent a proposal to the Council of Ministers, asking them to consider and examine the proposal carefully and to inform him of their views about the project as soon as possible. According to the Turkish translation of the proposal, it consisted of 4 introductory and 33 supplementary articles. Let me give you some details of its content, because this is the first document and the only document we have now about this project. In the first 4 articles, which Oliphant did not want to negotiate, he proposed the creation of a migration center in Palestine for Ottoman Jews of Anatolia and Rumelia, as well as foreign Jews who had been emanated by the Treaty of Berlin. This fertile land would be populated by Jewish migrants who would be financially supported by wealthy Jews in Europe and Christian nations who would support their return to Palestine. I think by these Christian nations, Oliphant meant, of course, Christian Zionists of the period. With this strong support, the Jewish migrants would develop modern agriculture and local industry. For the organization of the migration and the administration of the Jews, a company would be established which would pay for the price of the land and help the government increase its revenue by collecting taxes and other sources of income. Finally, upon the securement of foreign investment and the smooth operation of the new arrangements, it could be possible to extend reforms to other provinces. In the remaining 33 supplementary articles, which he considered to be negotiable with the Ottoman government, Oliphant detailed his proposal that essentially included the following points. The Ottoman government would authorize the establishment of a company which would purchase estate land in the Belka sub-province in order to settle Jewish and other migrants and improve the conditions of the land. The company would be called the Ottoman Company for Settlement of Migrants in Palestine. It would be subject to Ottoman laws and regulations, and the government would be able to appoint a director and a deputy director in order to monitor its activities. It would be established within a year of its concession, and its headquarters would be in Istanbul, but it would retain the right to establish branches in some other capital cities. It would purchase 1 million acre state land between River Jordan and the Hajj route to Mecca in Balka, with the right to use its underground and ground resources. The area would be constituted as a separate administrative unit and be attached to the province of Syria. The price of an acre of land was left to be decided during the negotiations. The company would start a railway project from Haifa to Tiberias and then to Dead Sea within 3 years of its date of concession. 1 kilometer of the state land on each side of the railway route would be donated to the company, and the remaining land beyond 1 kilometer limit on the route would be purchased at the same price. As you see, so detailed. The company would have a representative in the Balkan administration, and irrespective of their origins of nationality, all migrants would accept Ottoman citizenship and would be subject to Ottoman laws and regulations, but they would be exempt from military service for the first 2 years, and local population who reside in the purchased land would be subject to the company rules, not the Ottoman rules. And however, all migrants settled within the purchased land would have their own court system, and decisions taken by this court would not be sent to the Court of Appeal. Security and order of the community would be provided by the infantry and cavalry forces chosen from among the migrants. If activities of the migrant community proved fruitful, the Ottoman government would permit their expansion to other parts of Palestine. The language of communication with Ottoman officials would be in either French or English, as you see, so detailed proposal. The Council of Ministers discussed these proposals on May the 8th, 1880, and they decided that, unanimously decided that this proposal, I quote, meant government within a government in Ottoman documents, that's hükümet içinde hükümet demek olacağından, and in Layard's report it was reported as state within a state. And again I quote, it would involve political and administrative dangers, hence it was unacceptable. They also added that although the land of Balka was certainly in need of improvement in order to settle down some population, time had not yet come for this initiative, and allowing some migrant settlements in the region would create problems for the local population. So this was the essence of the Ottoman response to Oliphant.
Sorry, what is it, the Balk or Balkan?
Belka, near Tiberias, I think, between Jordan and...
On the east side of the river.
A brief assessment of the proposal. Its basic assumption was that the Ottoman state was very weak in its international relations and financial affairs, as well as in trying to preserve state authority over its territories in the Balkans, Eastern Anatolia, and the Arab lands. Oliphant, to me, naively assumed that any state in such a vulnerable position would be willing to sell a portion of its land, provided that it was not densely populated, disregarding the sensitivity of its location from domestic and international points of view. Moreover, the proposal envisaged an autonomous region to be governed by newly arriving, mainly foreign migrants, at a time when the Ottoman state already had deep suspicions about the intentions of the great powers who were expected to support Jewish migration to Palestine, and at a time when the Ottoman state suffered severely from autonomous demands. To add to these, it proposed that the migrants would have their own independent judicial and security systems. Last but not least, one of the important weaknesses of the proposal was that its financial aspect was based on assumptions rather than on realistic sources. Oliphant assumed that the project would be financed by the wealthy Jews around the world, as well as by Christian restorationists, a group about whom the Ottoman ruling elite, not surprisingly, knew almost nothing. It was at this last point that had the greatest influence on Oliphant for some time. During his stay in Istanbul, Oliphant reiterated his belief that the restoration of Jews to Palestine was one of the signs of the second coming of Jesus Christ. As you know, this group believed in the prophecy that in order to second coming of Jesus Christ, the precondition was that Jews should return to Palestine and establish a state, and the capital city of that state will be Kudus, Jerusalem, and the famous Süleyman's Mabed will be reconstituted or reconstructed in Jerusalem, right? So these were the basic principles that Oliphant and his associates believed. So the first precondition was the Jewish return to Palestine. He used this view to persuade the British ambassador to Berlin and some other influential people at the same time, and Laird, in his remarks on this, said that, I quote, he, Oliphant, himself put a stopper on it by telling the Sultan's secretary that he was seeking to fulfill the scripture that the end of the world was to come when the Jews were restored to their native land, and His Majesty had no desire to hurry that event. In other words, Oliphant was arguing that we have to do this in order for Jesus Christ come to the world for the second time. And this did not appeal to anybody in Istanbul as well as in other capitals of the great powers. It appears that right from the beginning, Oliphant believed that the whole project would essentially be financed by the Christians of the West, who believed in the prophecy that restoration of the Jews in Palestine was a precondition of the second coming of Jesus Christ. Let me pass these. And this was his first initiative and unsuccessful. But in 1882, he came back again to Istanbul, this time tried to use United States influence on the port to achieve permission from the Ottoman government. From 1878 until 1882, it became clear to all at the time that the British, in the eyes of Abdulhamid II and his ministers, lost its prestige, and now as a British who is trying to achieve something, the British government or British diplomats in Istanbul would not help. That's why he approached the American diplomatic mission in Istanbul. Oliphant shared his knowledge on the subject and on the Jews' difficult position in Russia and Romania with Wallace, the United States representative in Istanbul, and drew his attention to the Romanian Jewish refugees in the streets of Istanbul at the time from 1878 onwards. Overwhelming majority of the refugees in Istanbul were Muslims from the Balkans, but there were some Jews, thousands of Jews who were persecuted by the Russians during the war and after. So in the streets of Istanbul, everybody knew that there were many Jews. And Wallace, who acknowledged it by saying that my sympathy was naturally excited in their behalf, wrote to his superior in the United States and accepted Jewish representatives from Romania, and also informed his superiors that on his own personal initiative, he will try to help them. On 12 of June 1882, Wallace went to visit Said Pasha, the Grand Vizier, and expressed his personal interest in the question. After making it clear that this connection with the question was unofficial, Wallace asked the Grand Vizier whether the Sultan and the Porte would allow Jewish refugees to come to the Ottoman territories. Wallace was assured that the question had been before the Council of Ministers, which had decided that, I quote now, the Jews from whatever parts could come and settle in Turkey, that's in the document, that there was a general law of immigration in force which must be taken for the guidance of such Jews to come and settle in the Ottoman territories. That they could come when they pleased, and they would be settled in groups of 200 or 250 families, that they could settle on any unoccupied lands in Mesopotamia, about Aleppo, or in the regions of Anatolia, but not in Palestine. That the firman of the Sultan was not necessary, for having once approved the law, he could not be called on to do so again. That every colonist was simply bound to become an Ottoman subject. It appears that the Porte's answer was based on subtle calculations. First, by welcoming all migrants, including Jews, the Porte was trying to compensate millions of populations lost during the war of 1877-78. Secondly, by settling the migrants in wastelands within a proper program, the Porte wished to improve agricultural products in areas where the state had firm control. Thirdly, by welcoming the Jewish migrants on its own terms, at a time when hundreds of thousands of them were persecuted in Romania and Russia, the Porte aimed to increase its prestige, at least in the eyes of such states as the United States. And finally, the Porte maintained its position regarding its ban on Jewish migration to Palestine, and its last response included a clear message to the effect that because of its proximity, Jewish migrants would not be allowed to settle in the province of Syria either. Wallace was satisfied with the Porte's answer and pleased that apart from the territories of Syria and Palestine, Jewish migrants were welcomed to the Ottoman state in order to settle, especially in Anatolia. To him, the Ottoman law of immigration was liberal and encouraging, and if they behaved themselves, the Jews, they would do well. Thus, he concluded his report by stating that there is nothing to prevent all the Israelites on the earth from settling in Asiatic Turkey. They shall not settle in Palestine. That is the only prohibition. He reported on what went between himself and the Porte regarding the Jewish migration to Oliphant and the two Romanian Jewish representatives at the time in Istanbul. Having provided a copy of the Ottoman law of immigration in English, Wallace informed Oliphant that his associates that he had fulfilled his mission, and as far as he was concerned, nothing more could be demanded from the Ottoman government, because the main argument Oliphant and his associates used was that the plight of Jewish migrants at the time, and the Ottomans answered positively to solve that problem. Now, let me conclude by saying that Oliphant devoted the last decade of his life to the question of Jewish settlement in Palestine. He was born into a family whose evangelical convictions had deep impact on his religio-political activities. Although he had been familiar with the Restorationist view and Jewish ideas of returning to Palestine for some decades, he did not make it a primary object of his life until 1878. Many developments in that year, some personal and religious, others political and international, led him to devote the rest of his life to the restoration of Jews to Palestine. Actually, this man settled in Haifa, and this was his house during the rest of his life until he died in 1888. Yes, several books, not only one, several books actually he wrote. Oliphant's proposal of 1879 regarding Jewish settlement in Palestine was unique in several respects. Firstly, it was the first and the only written proposal submitted to the Ottoman government. It was well prepared, articulated, and based on solid groundwork in Palestine. 37 articles in total covered almost all aspects of a sample administration envisaged to be established in the Belka region. Secondly, it predated the Zionist initiatives in the second half of the 1890s at the port by almost 2 decades. Thirdly, by receiving such a well-prepared proposal, Abdulhamid's government had for the first time an opportunity to discuss an issue which was to be repeatedly on the agenda until the end of the Ottoman state. In other words, Oliphant provided a valuable opportunity for the Ottoman Sultan to become aware of the Palestine question so early in his reign and assess its different aspects, and finally develop his policies regarding the region in question. The Ottoman position regarding this question was clear and consistent. The Jewish migrants were to be welcomed on the condition that they would be settled in areas designated by the government in Anatolia and Rumelia and would be subject to Ottoman laws in action. It was also made clear that they were not to be allowed to settle in Syria and Palestine. As for Oliphant, his position was also clear and consistent. Inspired by his belief in the prophecy that the second coming of Jesus Christ required Jewish restoration to Palestine, he devoted his time and energy during the last decade of his life to the realization of this goal. During the 3 years of his endeavors to get Ottoman permission for Jewish settlement in Palestine, Oliphant time and again shared his views about the prophecy with diplomats and statesmen, even with members of the Ottoman cabinet. When he faced strong refusal from the Ottoman government, he decided to settle in Haifa, Palestine, in order to contribute to his goal, at least at a personal level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Buzpinar. And I open the floor for questions or comments, if there be any. Yes, Dr. Tali.
I have 2 questions and a comment. The first question is, was there any connection, given that Oliphant had put the issue of settlement in the Balta on the Ottoman agenda, did this actually influence the later Ottoman settlement of Circassians in the Balta? They already settled or tried to settle some Algerians in Erbil in the 1850s, and by the time Oliphant made his proposal, they already brought Balta back under direct rule. So was this connected with the settlement of the Circassians and several settlements in the subsequent decades? The second one, I'm curious about how Oliphant has very much a Zionist evangelical definition of Palestine. But in all of the Islamic sources, Balta would not really be part of Palestine. It was really part of Jundus Shah and outside. So, did the Ottomans share his view of where Palestine was, in the Zionist? And I'd also advise that when you use the term Palestine, settlement in Palestine, or being in Balta, you kind of treat it with a bit of sensitivity because it's a big political issue. And the Zionists claim that Jordan is eastern Palestine and this should be the alternative homeland for the Palestinians. And we're just now coming up to the Trump deal of the century, which was declared Jerusalem an Arab. So maybe put it between inverted commas when you make this.
Right. The first question is very interesting, and I've never seen any connection, but very interesting. I was just thinking the chronology when you were asking the question. Many refugees came to Syria after the war, 77, 78. Probably their decision to settle them in Syria predates Oliphant's proposal, because Oliphant came to Istanbul in May and probably submitted his proposal in June 1879. We already know that by 1878 there were more than 20,000 refugees, new settlements in Syria. So probably it predates Oliphant's proposal. For the second, I don't think the Ottomans had Arabic meaning in their mind. I've never seen any differentiation. For instance, all the time they use the term Palestine, and which areas that term covers, I don't know. I mean, up to where, for instance, in the minds of Ottoman officials in the 1880s, Palestine covered, and Syria, the distinction, because they used the term Syria and Palestine, it was forbidden both places for Jewish settlement. I think it probably, I learned it from your question that Palestine Arabic definition is very specific and it does not include Belka region.
This Jund Palestine is of course irrelevant, I think, in the 19th century, Jund Palestine or Jund al-Urdun, for that matter. But I think, no, I mean it is, as far as the borders are concerned, it is totally different. I mean both. I mean Jund Palestine actually does not apply to Palestine as such, and Jund al-Urdun also is not Transjordan of today.
There was no Transjordan, but I'm curious how the Ottomans reacted.
Yeah, but I'm not,
they used the term Palestine for the region. I don't know.
Professor Tufan Buzpinar said, I'm not sure what the Ottomans had in mind when I am not sure that they have used
the Sanjak of Palestine.
the Sanjak of Jerusalem.
Qudus.
There was no Sanjak of Palestine.
Qudus.
And all the Sanjaks of Palestine were at one time part of the province of Damascus. At a later time in the 19th century, they were part of the province of Beirut, in fact. So if the Palestine catastrophe had happened then, and this is a paper that I refer to, written by the late Professor Salibi, if the Palestine catastrophe happened, say in 1890, there would be no question of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. They would be part of the population of the province of Beirut. But again, to go back to the question of Palestine, I think there is, and here I draw on the research of my colleague Samir Saikali, and also, I forgot the name of the other scholar. For example, Khairuddin al-Ramli, this is a mufti of the 16th century from Ramla. He speaks of Palestine and gives some kind of geographical definition which corresponds to the Palestine that we all know. Another thing on the Balqa Palestine issue, I'm sure you are familiar with the book of Ihsan al-Nimr, Jabal al-Nablus wal-Balqa, because this was administratively, one contiguous territory and was treated as such.
It was Nablus part of Palestine.
Sorry?
Because in the Jund, it was not.
Sorry,
It was Nablus part of Palestine.
Was Nablus part of Palestine?
Was Nablus part of Palestine?
I mean, was there a Palestine?
Well, that's what I'm getting to.
Yeah. So, I mean, Jabal Nablus wal-Balqa was more of a natural unit as far as historians or writers were concerned then. So, I'm not saying that Balqa was part of Palestine, but I'm saying that the connection, just like, Jabal Khalil and Karak, so there are these natural connections that are determined by geography.
I think Palestine in the Ottomans was a geographical term, and administratively they did not use it. They used Sanjak of Qudus, for instance. Qudus Sanjak was an administrative term. But Palestine was a kind of vague geographical term. Arz of Palestine, yes.
The Qudus Sanjak of Jerusalem, and the Sanjak of Jerusalem and the Jund of Palestine, these are very similar issues. I'm asking, is there...
No, I don't think they are similar.
Eugene Rogan was the guy who was the expert on the... He says very clearly the Ottomans looked on what became Transjordan as Ajlun, Balqa, and the Sanjaks of Ma'ad and Karak. So I'm wondering whether there's any echo of this.
Right.
Was he operating on his
behalf, or was he operating on behalf of the English government? This is one aspect. And how far Herzl and the hardcore Zionist, Jewish Zionists were aware of these attempts, that predated the rise of Zionism and the colonial project?
I mean, the documents I saw and used did not contain any official link, official policy inclination or a sign of official policy, but he was supported and helped because Princess Christian was his friend, and she asked the Prime Minister to accept Oliphant and then sent him to the Foreign Affairs Minister, and they supplied him with letters of introduction, and the ambassador helped him to communicate with the ministers and with the leading politicians in Istanbul. So the British government's support was unofficial, not official, limited to that capacity. As for Herzl's view or connection with this, I think the importance of this proposal and project was that almost 17 years before Herzl, the Ottoman government faced a clear project of Jewish settlement, right? And by a Christian supporter of the project. I think this contribution by the Christians to the question of Jewish settlement as an important one. Oliphant died in 1888, lived in this house, and just before his death, he went to London, died there, but this house was his residence. But another important Christian Zionist called William Heckler, who helped Herzl to develop his ideas and establish his connection to the German royal family, and helped him come to Istanbul in 1898 and meet Kaiser in Istanbul, and asked Kaiser to at least mention this problem to the Sultan during their meeting, right? So it was not Oliphant who influenced Herzl maybe, but Herzl was influenced by another Christian Zionist who was the priest of British embassy in Vienna, but very important person in this context. And Herzl asked him, for instance, he was not known and nobody respected him or paid him great respect because of his ideas, but if he was seen with an emperor or an important statesman, people then would at least take him seriously, right? So that's what William Heckler did. And he was an honorary guest of the first 5 Zionist Congress held by Herzl. And it was because of William Heckler's connections that Herzl joined the team of Kaiser during his visit to Istanbul in October 1898, and then went to Jerusalem, and where publicly he was accepted by Wilhelm II.
He was an Anglican priest, Heckler?
Heckler, yes, yes.
No, actually, the question was I wanted to ask about why that for the Christian or Oliphant predates the Zionist Congress of 1897. So there was something already cooking before the Zionist Congress.
Oh, long before, yes, yes. And because of lack of time, I couldn't say much about the efforts of some British diplomats during the 1840s. For instance, the first 2 consuls in Jerusalem were from this group, Christian Zionists, or at the time they were called restorationists. William Young, for instance, and the second one, James Finn, who published on Palestine 2 volumes of his book, is very famous. So Lord Shaftesbury, he devoted all his life to this project, right? And Palestine Exploration Fund was established to help, in a way, the British public opinion that Palestine became a lively issue in Britain, in a way, in the second half of the 19th century. Many articles and books and visits to Palestine. And I think that's why I think this project is important, because until now, literature generally focused on Jewish efforts to organize Jewish settlement in Palestine.
So this is like 70 years before the Balfour Declaration. It's 70 years before the First World War. So the idea of Jewish financing the British government during the First World War is really irrelevant if the whole thing started in 1850, practically.
I think this is an important question. How much this Christian Zionist groups, although they were probably limited in number, but they occupied some important positions in the British government.
Primarily, therefore, their pretension is mainly biblical, or at least
yes,
whatever it is, evangelical.
They are still believing in the same prophecy, and United States, as you know, now is moving,
the United States
and
wasn't aware that
it is the second condition of this group. After Trump declared that decision, actually, he was visited by leading Christian Zionists of the United States. Remember, he gave a dinner at the White House. Sorry.
Tufan, I go back a long
Hocam, evet.
I remember when he was a graduate student, working with Sultan archives.
Let me see that.
Great friends of his professor, who was the Sami. I just wanted to, I have a few comments, not a question. I mean, it's very interesting.
Please.
And enlightening. I mean, I know the documentation for the 1890s, when there's, as you know, report after report saying, no, we don't want this, whatever. Rothschild offers money to send the hospital, they say, no thank you, we can take care of our own, and so on and so forth. About Herzl, in 1901, we know what Herzl's agenda was when he went to the Sultan. He offered to buy off the Ottoman national debt in return for Palestine, or Jewish settlement in the Ottoman Empire, in fact specifically Palestine, plus this connects with the public relations problem that Abdulhamid was having because of the Armenian massacres.
Exactly, yes, yes.
And Herzl also offered the good offices of the world Zionists to actually propagandize for him.
Yes.
So this goes back to the present, this comes to the present, well, the late, I should say, maybe it's not the case anymore, but the Turkish state's collaboration with the Jewish lobby against the recognition of the genocide. So this is just a little point.
No, I agree, but what I meant, Hocam, at the meeting in May 1901, Herzl and Abdulhamid did not officially discuss the question. They knew each in their mind that the main issue was Jewish settlement in Palestine, but at the meeting, it was not officially discussed. That's what I meant. Otherwise, both sides knew what the other side was asking, right? And as you said, Herzl, I think Abdulhamid, my own view, that Abdulhamid thought that he was unable to fulfill what he was promising. And that's why he said, okay, go on, work, right? And what you can do. And soon after, Hocam, they signed an agreement with the French creditors. And that's also an important sign that Abdulhamid did not credit Herzl much.
Baron Hirsch.
Right, yes. Yes, 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 yes. Thank you for that comment. And I think it's important that I underline again, this is the only case that Abdulhamid officially discussed with someone, with a foreigner, the Jewish settlement question in Palestine. And I know until now no other case that it was officially discussed by the Ottoman government.
meeting between Herzl and Hamid, I mean, the question of Jewish immigration was never mentioned.
No, never mentioned.
Although Herzl does speak of it in his memoirs, I think,
No,
or his diary.
he told the people around Abdülhamit, not to Abdülhamit himself.
That's really a revelation.
And actually, one important thing we can, in this context, mention is that when Kaiser, he promised Herzl that he will bring the issue to the attention of the Sultan. When Kaiser left the meeting with Abdülhamit II, he didn't want to see Herzl. Herzl was very disappointed and angry, and until the 2nd of November 1898 in Kudüs, Kaiser didn't want to come together with Herzl. And Herzl was very disappointed. And Ollenberg, one of the close politicians of Wilhelm II, told Herzl that whatever went between the two leaders, Kaiser did not want to see Herzl after the meeting with the Sultan. And Sultan not only rejected the proposal apparently, but at the same time, this is just a speculation by the way, at the same time, he didn't want Wilhelm interfere in this affair, politely, whatever he said. But after the meeting with the Sultan, Wilhelm did not want to see Herzl for some time, and in Kudüs it was only in public, in front of everybody, that he wanted to say hello, and and he cared for this issue.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry for the time.
Thank you very much.